Elena Monroe had always prided herself on professionalism. At St. Augustine Medical Center, nestled just outside Chicago, she was known for her discipline, compassion, and unshakable calm. 12-hour shifts, emergencies, death, miracles, none of it threw her off. Her colleagues joked that she had a steel spine and a velvet soul. Yet nothing in her decade of nursing could have prepared her for the moment she first laid eyes on the man in room 308. It was raining that night, the kind of spring rain that made the world smell clean, but brought accidents in waves. He had arrived with sirens howling, unconscious, unresponsive, pulled from the wreckage of a silver BMW that had slammed into a tree at nearly 70 miles per hour. The paramedics had worked on him the whole way. No ID, no phone, no wallet. Just a burned driver's license, illegible, and a watch cracked, expensive, and stopped at 8:43. His injuries were catastrophic. Multiple broken ribs, a collapsed lung, internal bleeding, and most critical of all, a traumatic brain injury. Neurosurgery had stabilized the swelling in his brain, but he hadn't woken up. After 48 hours, he was officially in a coma. No family came, no friends, nothing in his chart but the initials JD, hastily scribbled on his intake bracelet. Elena was assigned to him 2 days later. At first, he was like any other critical patient, quiet, unmoving, a chart full of question marks and worst-case scenarios. But there was something about him that struck her. Maybe it was the odd stillness in his face, the strong jaw with a faint shadow of stubble someone had forgotten to shave. Or maybe it was the way his hand hung limp against the sheet, fingers half-curled, like he was about to catch something delicate. She told herself it was pity, nothing more. The days bled into weeks. She spoke to him during her shifts, more than she realized. Told him about the weather, about the drama in the staff break room, about a podcast she was listening to. At first, it was just to fill the silence. Then she started reading to him. Poetry, newspapers, even pages from her old college books. She played him music sometimes, Chopin, the Beatles, even Springsteen. Once, she caught herself telling him about her mother's funeral, about the hollow ache of grief, and how she still reached for her mom's number on bad days. She cried that day. And he, of course, didn't move. Not a twitch. But the strangest part was how she started feeling him. Not just caring, but feeling. She found herself thinking about him on her days off, wondering if his vitals had stayed stable, if his lungs were clearing, if he'd heard her when she whispered, "Please wake up." She told herself it was empathy. Nurses got attached all the time, but it wasn't empathy. It was something else. She started dreaming of him. Not the comatose body in the hospital bed, but of him awake, laughing, dancing, kissing her in places she'd never even seen in real life. In her dreams, his name was James. The hospital staff began to tease her, gently at first. "Your sleeping prince still holding on," they'd joke. "What are you gonna do if he wakes up married?" She laughed along. but something inside her bristled when they called him her prince. She wasn't a teenager with a fantasy. She was a woman 34, divorced, with a mortgage and a closet full of scrubs. But still, something about him had taken root in her. By week 7, he was no longer just a patient. He was her person. And then, one morning in July, he blinked. It happened quietly. She was adjusting his Roman 4, humming without realizing it. When she turned back to the monitor, she saw it the flutter of his eyelids. Not a spasm, not a twitch. A slow, heavy blink. She froze. "JD," she whispered. His eyes opened fully, unfocused, blue-gray like fog over the ocean. They met hers for only a second before fluttering closed again. He blinked, she told the team, breathless. "He's waking up." They flooded the room. Tests were ordered, scans reviewed. He was in a state of minimal consciousness, but improving. Over the next 2 days, he opened his eyes more often, followed light, and even squeezed her hand when she spoke to him. And on the 12th day after that blink, he whispered, "Where?" "Am I?" The voice was hoarse, cracked, but real. Alina nearly sobbed. She leaned in. "You're in a hospital," she said. "You've been in a coma, but you're safe now." He stared at her, trying to process. "You," he said. "I know your voice." It hit her like a bolt. All those days, all those stories, all those confessions, he'd heard them. Her cheeks flushed, her heart raced. "You do?" she asked, laughing a little through her tears. That's good. I guess I talk too much," he smiled weakly. But it was a smile. It changed everything. His name really was James. James Daniel Cross. 37. Lived in Evanston. A software architect. Divorced. No kids. No siblings. His parents had died 2 years ago. The reason no one came looking for him was simple. There had been no one to call. The day of the accident, he'd left work early, cleared his desk, planning to drive across the country and start over somewhere else. The wreck had erased all of that. His recovery was slow, but miraculous. Speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational rehab, every step forward was a victory. Alina visited even when she wasn't assigned to his care. At first, it was under the pretense of checking on his progress. Then it became coffee in the rehab lounge, and eventually, long walks in the hospital courtyard. James had a dry, wry sense of humor. He told her he dreamed of her voice before he saw her face. He said it was the only thing that anchored him when everything else was darkness. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just held his hand. They didn't kiss until the day he was discharged. It wasn't dramatic, no swelling music or sudden embrace. He simply leaned over while she was adjusting the strap on his bag, touched her chin, and kissed her like he'd been waiting for years. She stood frozen for a moment, then kissed him back. That night, she cried in her car for a full 10 minutes, overwhelmed by the depth of what had happened. For months afterward, they tried to be cautious. They told no one. She worried about the ethics, the boundary lines, but she was no longer his nurse. He insisted she saved his life, not just by tending his wounds, but by giving him a reason to come back. They moved in together 9 months after his discharge. He proposed a year later in the very courtyard where she first wheeled him to sit under the sun. News of their story spread quickly. First, a local journalist picked it up. Then, national outlets. Nurse falls in love with coma patient became a headline that bounced across social media. Comment sections were a mix of wonder and skepticism. Some called it beautiful. Others said it was too strange to be true. But those who had ever loved someone beyond logic, beyond time, beyond the physical, understood. There was something timeless in what they had. Their wedding was held in a small garden, just 2 blocks from the hospital. Alina wore a simple ivory dress, James a navy suit with a white rose pinned to the lapel. His best man was the EMT who pulled him from the wreckage. Her maid of honor was the nurse who first noticed how much time she spent in room 308. When they said their vows, James whispered, "You found me in the dark, and I found the rest of my life in your voice." Not long after, Alina became pregnant. A boy. They named him August, after the month James woke up, and the season that gave them back their future. Sometimes, when the baby cried in the night, Alina would sit in the nursery, rocking him gently, thinking about the endless hours she had spent at his father's bedside, hoping, aching, praying. She'd hum the same songs, read the same stories, and when August stared up at her, wide-eyed and curious, she saw both of them reflected in him, the man who came back from the brink, and the woman who waited with her whole heart. There were hard days, of course. James still had memory gaps, occasional migraines, and a lingering fear of driving. Alina battled anxiety, moments of guilt, and the stress of public attention. But none of it dimmed what they had, because they knew, better than most, that love doesn't always come in expected packages. Sometimes it arrives broken, unconscious, wrapped in bandages, with no name and no past. And sometimes it grows in silence, spoken into existence by the voice of someone who believes, even when there's no reason to, and in the end, that belief is what saved them. Not medicine, not luck, but the sheer, stubborn, breathtaking force of hope.